Most of us have probably said the Pledge of Allegiance more times than we can count. But, behind those familiar words, there's this incredible story of marketing, Cold War anxiety, and a huge constitutional fight that, believe it or not, is still unresolved today. So let's jump right in. But we're not going to start at the beginning. Nope, we're starting right in the middle of a modern-day legal battle that called into question the very words millions of American kids say in school every single day. So, back in 2002, a federal court dropped this absolute bombshell. What Judge Goodwin was saying here is that by officially endorsing a belief in God, the pledge was no longer neutral. It was taking a side on religion, and that, he argued, puts it squarely in conflict with the First Amendment. Well, this whole firestorm got started because of one man, Michael Newdow, an atheist father from California. He filed a lawsuit saying that when his daughter had to listen to the phrase "under God" in her public school classroom, it was basically a form of religious indoctrination. It interfered with his right to teach her about religion, or non-religion, as he saw fit. When the court agreed with him, it sent shockwaves across the country. I mean, you had members of Congress gathering on the steps of the Capitol to recite the pledge in protest. It was a huge deal. But to really, truly understand this fight, we have to go back, way back, to the pledge's very, very unexpected beginnings. Yeah, you might think the pledge came from the Founding Fathers or some big patriotic moment in history, right? Wrong. The real origin story has nothing to do with them. It was actually cooked up from this bizarre mix of marketing and progressive politics. That's right, a Christian socialist. Bellamy wrote the pledge for a really popular kids magazine called The Youth's Companion. And get this, it was all part of a brilliant marketing plan to celebrate the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival. The magazine sold American flags to schools, and they created the pledge to give kids something to say to the flags they just sold them. It's pretty wild. Now look at this. What's really striking is what isn't in Bellamy's original version. The words "under God," totally absent. And here's a fun fact. As a socialist, Bellamy actually thought about putting in the words equality and fraternity, but he figured they'd be way too controversial for the time. So if Bellamy didn't write it, where on earth did "under God" come from? Well, the answer is pretty clear, and it's rooted deep in the anxieties of the Cold War. During this time, there was a huge push to draw a sharp line in the sand between the US and the Soviet Union. And one of the biggest forces behind this was a Catholic fraternal group called the Knights of Columbus. They really believed that adding a religious acknowledgement to the pledge was a powerful way to show the world what America stood for, in direct opposition to atheistic communism. And this campaign moved incredibly fast. It started with the Knights of Columbus doing it themselves. Then they pushed Congress. The real turning point came when President Eisenhower heard a sermon arguing that the pledge was missing, and I quote, "the definitive factor in the American way of life." He was sold. Just a few months later, it was law. And when he signed that bill, Eisenhower didn't mince words. He made it crystal clear what this was all about. This wasn't just some nice little tradition. He saw it as a strategic move, a way to sharpen what he called these spiritual weapons that he felt were vital to winning the Cold War. But here's the thing. Even before "under God" was ever part of the conversation, the Supreme Court had already gotten involved in another huge controversy about the pledge. Could you actually be forced to say it in the first place? Back in 1943, in a landmark case called West Virginia versus Barnett, the court made a powerful statement. They ruled that forcing students to salute the flag and say the pledge violated the First Amendment. The court famously said that no government official can force citizens to confess, by word or act, their faith in any matter of opinion. So you see, the Barnett case established that you can't be forced to participate. It has to be voluntary. And this set the perfect legal stage for Michael Newdow's challenge decades later. His case wasn't about being forced to say the words, but whether the government should be promoting those specific religious words in a public school at all. And that brings us right back to where we started. It's 2004, Michael Newdow's case has climbed all the way to the Supreme Court, and the entire country is holding its breath, waiting for a final, definitive answer on "under God." But before the justices could even start debating the First Amendment, they hit a procedural roadblock. It's a legal concept called standing. Basically, they had to decide if Michael Newdow, who didn't have full custody of his daughter, even had the legal right to sue on her behalf in the first place. And just like that, on that one technicality, the whole thing was over. The Supreme Court reversed the lower court's ruling without ever touching the huge constitutional question at the heart of the case. They completely and totally sidestepped the issue. Now, this is where the legal puzzle gets really fascinating, because even though the majority opinion dodged the big question, 3 justices wrote their own opinions arguing that the pledge was, in fact, constitutional. And they brought up this idea of ceremonial deism, this notion that words like under God have basically lost their religious punch over time and are now more about patriotism and history than actual prayer. So, after all of that legal drama, where are we today? Well, the short answer is we're kind of in a state of legal limbo. Because the Supreme Court decided the case on a technicality, they never gave a final ruling on the constitutionality of under God. That means the debate is still very much alive, and it really comes down to 2 totally different ways of looking at those 2 little words. So on one side, you have that ceremonial deism argument that it's just a harmless patriotic tradition now, a nod to history. But on the other side, you have the endorsement argument. This view says that when it's in a school, led by a teacher, it sends a powerful message that the government prefers religion over non-religion, and that can make kids who don't believe feel like outsiders. You know, the journey of just these 2 words is pretty amazing. It shows how a simple patriotic verse, which started as a marketing gimmick, turned into a reflection of our national fears and our deepest debates. The Pledge of Allegiance is still a powerful symbol of unity for many, but it's also a point of division, constantly testing that fragile line between church and state in America.